Today I'd like to continue our study on the preeminence of Jesus Christ. This will be the third installment. And I'd like to again read from Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 through 18. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things consist. And he is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he may have the preeminence. Well, as we've seen in our devotional study up to this point, we see in verse 15 that Jesus is called the icon, the true, accurate, and complete representation or representative and manifestation of Christ. And in the second half of that verse, he is called the firstborn, the prototokos, which means highest in rank, not first created. And in that verse, what he is saying is that he is a primogenitor, the legal inheritor over all creation. And so now we'd like to move on to verse 16. And let me just read it. For by him all things were created that are in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him. And verse 16 really is the beginning of the answer to the serious influence that the Gnostics had had over the church at Colossae, especially dealing with Jesus, who was seen as the first and most important of the emanations from God under Gnostic understanding. And the Gnostics just could not tolerate the idea that Jesus was the creator of the physical universe. And so we see Paul clearly declare that Jesus was the creator of the universe, both physical and spiritual. Verse 16 again, for by him all things were created that are in heaven and on earth, whether visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created through him and for him. And in that verse, Paul is dealing with the dualism of Gnosticism, that the physical world is evil and only the spiritual realm is good. The truth is affirmed by the Apostle John and the writer of Hebrews. John 1:3, all things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. And Hebrews chapter 1, verse 2, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son, who he has appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the worlds. And because the Gnostics viewed matter as evil, they argued that neither a good God nor a good emanation, in their view, or spiritual emissary, could have ever created the universe. And because of this, they also denied Christ as coming in the flesh, which of course would have been a denial then of the propitiatory work of the Lord Jesus Christ on Calvary's cross, to which 2 John chapter 1 deals with that issue. For many deceivers have gone out into the world who do not confess Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. This is a deceiver and an antichrist. And so what we have here is Paul maintaining that Jesus made all things, both in heaven and in earth, both visible and invisible. He is speaking of the invisible portion when he says in verse 16, thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. The point is that Jesus has no equal. He has no rival. And unlike the Gnostic emanations, Jesus created all things. And because of that, he is of necessity uncreated, and that the physical world is not evil. Paul's words here also refute the false teaching that Christ was one of the many intermediaries and that the angels were to be worshipped. All angelic and celestial powers in heaven and earth were created and were subject to Jesus Christ. The only one then to be worshipped would be the Lord Jesus Christ. So he created all, and therefore he is Lord of all. And when we view the magnitude and the complexity of creation, we begin to get a glimpse of the power and of the wisdom and knowledge of our Creator. A couple of verses speak to that very issue. Romans chapter 1, verse 20, "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that were made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." Psalm 19, verses 1 through 4. "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their word to the end of the world. In them he has set a tabernacle for the sun." So Jesus Christ, in arguing that he is to be preeminent, that he is superior to all, Paul argues that he is the creator of the universe in opposition to the Gnostics. And think about that just for a moment. What that means. It speaks of the vastness of the universe. Let me just give you a few stats just to kind of help us get a little bit of a glimpse regarding that. The sun, for example, has a diameter of 864,000 miles, 100 times that of the earth. And the sun could hold 1.3 million Earth-sized planets inside it. The star Betelgeuse has a diameter of 100 million miles, which is larger than the orbit of the Earth around the sun. And it takes 8.5 minutes for light emanating from the sun to reach Earth. It is 93 million miles away. And yet some of that same light, it would take more than 4 years for it to reach the nearest star, which would be Alpha Centauri, which is some 24 trillion miles from Earth. And the galaxy to which our sun belongs, the Milky Way, contains over hundreds of billions of stars. Astronomers also estimate that there are millions, even billions, of galaxies, many of which are magnitudinally bigger than our Milky Way. And that is the Lord Jesus, our Creator, who did all of that. And yet, even though he created such a massive universe with such unbelievable complexity, we read this in Philippians chapter 2, verses 6 through 8. "Who being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant, and coming in the likeness of men. And being found in the appearance of a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross.